It's not easy to share the most difficult parts of your journey with others, but there is a superpower that you develop when you share your story. On today's episode, we welcome Latisha Reid, Vanessa, Pierre, and LaRose, who will talk about their experience with the Client Leadership Council, a new initiative launched by the Capital Area Food Bank in Washington, D.C. during the early days of the pandemic. Welcome to Elevating Voices, Ending Hunger. I'm Amy McReynolds, your host and Chief Equity Officer at Feeding America. Elevating Voices, Ending Hunger is a series of conversations with individuals who are disrupting the status quo and building more equitable futures to improve food security all across this country. Latisha and Vanessa are cohort members of the Client Leadership Council, and Adam is Director of Advocacy and Public Policy with the Food Bank. Join us as we talk about the story of self and the power of using one's voice to advocate for strong and resilient communities. So Adam, maybe I'll start with you. First, I'd love for you just to share a little bit about yourself, and maybe you can also talk about the work of the Capital Area Food Bank.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for having us and having me. I'll start with the food bank. So, we have existed as an organization since 1980. So we were founded on Martin Luther King Day about 42 years ago. And, we've been really working towards hunger alleviation ever since. What I tell folks is we are one of 6 food banks in the 200 Feeding America Food Bank network with 3 states in our service area. So from an advocacy and operational and programmatic standpoint, cover a really unique jurisdiction between the District of Columbia, the United States Congress, Maryland, and of course, the Commonwealth of Virginia. At the height of the pandemic, we served over 550,000 folks struggling to access their next meal. And in FY22, we anticipate distributing about 45 million meals worth of food through a network of hundreds of regional nonprofit partners. And like many food banks throughout the pandemic, we've had to really change our entire approach operationally. And it's been the most, labor and resource intensive crisis we have ever navigated. So quite an experience, and it's, quite an organization, great kind of roots and history in the community. And it really allows us to work with our, range of partners in a number of different ways. And so, what I tell folks in terms of kind of where I start and, my role in this is, just my own lived experience with food insecurity. I've had the privilege to work in a number of different environments, nonprofits, Capitol Hill government, et cetera. But, what I carry with me is some of the most vivid memories in terms of, waiting in line for SNAP and WIC with my mom, being ashamed to show folks where I lived in a kind of double wide trailer on the outskirts of, Tallahassee, Florida. And I carry that with me every day. And I bring this to the work and I bring this to the organization. And I find a lot of folks who, work in these fields and at this organization have similar experiences and really understand it from a real empathetic perspective of, to a certain extent, what it's like to really struggle to access, one's next meal.
I'm curious, Client Leadership Council, what was the genesis of the idea?
Well, we have, as an organization, really always taken steps to listen to the voices of our clients, but really in the onset of COVID-19, really kind of seeing a lot of the inequities and the disparities only worsen, really wanted to take a real formal step to codify what that looks like organizationally. And so, we kind of got together as a team, I think 3 or 4 months into the pandemic and realized that we really need to take a real step to lift up the voices of folks who are, historically, marginalized and excluded from, a lot of the seats at the table as we as an organization, have a privilege to sit at.
Are there particular pillars of the program that the council is centered around?
We have really constructed the curriculum and the 10-month program really based on the Marshall Gans model of story of self and public narrative and public leadership. Really just kind of the belief that, Marshall Gans being one of the first organizer alongside Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers Union, that, you really can't change people's hearts and minds, and particularly those with, power and privilege, without putting your heart into it as well as your mind. and sharing that story. And so, we really focus wholeheartedly on kind of building out that story of self and really further empowering members to really sit with a lot of, the things that they've overcome and continue to overcome, and not, really be ashamed to share that in positions of power.
Latisha and Vanessa, hello, ladies. You are both members of the Client Leadership Council. I'm curious, how did you learn about the Client Leadership Council?
So I'm Vanessa, and I am part of the first class of the Client Leadership Council. I think it was a referral. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and
Okay.
Something came across my inbox because I had attended a previous advocacy institute. And I was just so excited about it because it almost was like this level 2 to take the skills that I'd learned previously with a great organization that covered the entire area instead of just my, small part of Montgomery County, and really advance my skills to make some change in my neighborhood. So I applied, and it was an invaluable experience for sure.
Latisha, what about yourself? How did you learn about the council?
The same as Vanessa. I was referred by someone, and it's funny because as I told Adam, initially someone sent it to me. Someone is very instrumental in the lives of my sons and myself, and I pushed the application aside for probably about 2 months. And as the deadline came inched closer and closer, I just on a whim, it piqued my interest, but on a whim, I said, let me just fill this out. Had no idea that I would be selected. And it was literally within hours of submitting the application. And I'm so glad that I was selected, because each month I found out more and more about this phenomenal group of men and women and all that this program entails, and it's great. It really has been so informative in helping with our advocacy and all that we believe in.
And Latisha, you are in the program now, is that right?
Yes.
So, Vanessa, you said there were some amazing things that you learned through your participation. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of those are?
I feel like I always go back to the same things, but that just speaks to the impact that it had on me. We had one particular teacher, Sean. There you go. There we go. He came a couple of times to talk about the story of self, and I've always struggled with this piece. And basically, the story of self is being able to tell your story in such a way that it makes your advocacy efforts more impactful, right? Lived experiences, as we learned through our advocacy training, is golden. It's something that separates the facts, and really hits home with whomever it is that you're advocating to. So his lessons, he came back, I think, 2 or 3 times during my class. I hope that the new class is benefiting from him. He's amazing. That was probably, to this day, I recall on the lessons that he taught and the methods that he taught and the way that you are to break down your story in a way that is concise, but also draws emotion, and has really helped me. I still use his formula today when I'm giving testimony or just advocating to any small groups, large groups. It helps me craft my story in such a way that is impactful, but also maintains the boundaries that I've set for people knowing about me.
Yes.
By the end of that class, we were kind of like a little family. I remember the first day that we went, and we were in this big warehouse, and it was cold. Adam, it was cold. Okay.
That was in the middle of the pandemic. We had to have
Yes, it was in the middle of the pandemic in a warehouse with desks all apart. And I remember driving there and was like, oh no, I'm not from this area. So I was like, where are these people taking me? what is this? And we pulled up to this warehouse, but that first day of like hearing everyone's story, but not just the people who were a part of the group, hearing that the people that we would be learning from and being supported by had stories too. I remember the first time that I heard Adam's story, and I was, first of all, we're both from Florida, so gang on that. But
Amazing.
Hearing that he had gone through something, it just makes you respect the people who are talking to you, and makes you just allow yourself to be vulnerable, because they've walked a lot of the same paths that you have. And hearing all the stories and connecting with people in that way, between telling the story and hearing the stories, had the biggest influence on me and expanded my own advocacy realm, because a lot of it, because Capital Area Food Bank is about food, but advocating for domestic violence victims and, mental health and all of these different things, they all play back into food insecurity. So it helped me connect the dots in my own advocacy efforts, if that makes sense.
Yes. Latisha, you were starting to talk about the people that you are meeting on this journey as part of the council. Tell me a little bit about what's been impactful for you.
Meeting such a huge cross section of people with different socioeconomic backgrounds and different lived experiences, but most of them all have the same common threads at some point in their lives, and that you can take some or most of them, you can take something from them and still learn from those experiences, learn or relate to those experiences that they've had. And I think it all makes us a tighter core group, and that has made it all worthwhile. And it's kind of bittersweet that we're like getting to home plate.
It's coming to a close.
Yes, and it's moved along so fast.
Yes.
Yeah, but the time that we've spent is chock full of information and bonding and advocacy. We learned so much during those times, but it's so supportive as well. Very supportive.
Yes. So I'm curious, Latisha, what are some of the other skills that you are developing?
Effective communication, team building, advocacy, and one of the best, getting out of my own way.
That one's really powerful. What does that mean? Say more.
Sometimes I tend to overthink things when I can just, I'm on the right path, but I overthink. So I need to just jump in, get it done, and move on to the next thing. Because I have the ideas, I have it in place, and I just need not to procrastinate, just get it done and move on to the next thing on my agenda. The next, so yeah.
All very important skills. And I heard you just talk about a little bit of something. Maybe you knew that about yourself already, but it sounds like you've developed some skills and some ways to manage that. Vanessa, what about you? What are some things that you learned about yourself through involvement with the cohort?
That's a good question. What did I learn about myself? Well, I learned that I don't know a lot.
The more you know, the more you don't know, right?
Yeah. I learned that I had a lot to learn. And I kind of knew that going in because, like I said, I had just recently moved here. And so my experience living and growing up in South Florida, everywhere you go, what I was fighting for looked different. I had kind of learned that before I got to CLC, but it really helped me to see other people's perspectives and change the way that I talk to different groups. It helped me, like I said, connect the dots. What I learned about myself is that I had a lot more work to do. I had a lot more work to do. And I bring that back to that. I bring that back to that first cold day in the warehouse.
Very impactful day, yes.
Yes, I sat up front, girl. I was ready. I was like, I'm going to be the star student in this class, okay? And I think I might have been like one of the first people to get up and tell your story.
Okay.
And I didn't have a baseline for what to say. And I was so in my head that I might have left all the feeling out of it. And that's me, right? And I sat there the rest of the class beating myself up about what I could have said and didn't say. And I was like, everybody else's story here is just so great. And I learned that I had imposter syndrome.
Ah, yes. Tell me what that means. We hear that term a lot.
I still struggle with that, but that first couple of lessons, I had heard stories from people who I felt like I've always had issues identifying with my own story. I think as a means of survival, you almost separate yourself from your story. And I felt like everyone else there deserved to be there because they had been through so much, because I had disconnected from what I had been through. And I was like, I haven't struggled as much as these people have. I have no place to be here. So that imposter syndrome is that inner voice telling you that you're not qualified. You haven't heard enough. You haven't been through enough to be qualified enough to help people. Another thing was, I thought that because my story wasn't over, you almost feel like you shouldn't tell your story because you're not up out of it yet.
Yes, right. So, it's still ongoing.
Yeah. So my inner critic was just telling me all the things. The more stories I listened to, then this was before that first lesson, because that was addressed in that teaching with Sean. But in that listening to everyone's story, I was just like, I shouldn't be here. I maybe need to struggle a little more to be here, but that was quickly resolved, and I felt comfortable. But I did learn that about myself, and that was like my first introduction to imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And I was able to work through that through the program.
Experiencing that, yes. Latisha, what about you? What have you been learning about yourself?
How to not doubt myself as much. Again, how not to doubt myself so much. Not to be, because it took me a long time to share my story.
Yes.
Or certain parts of my story, because I felt like I failed on so many levels. I failed in my marriage. I failed my children. I failed my career. I failed in my business. So it took me a long time to share my story, and I stuffed so much for so long, and it was only through therapy and coming to the realization that you can only carry so much by yourself. And at some point you have to let it out and ask for help.
Right.
And in doing so, at some point, if you don't seek help and don't forgive yourself and move forward, then you'll remain stuck. And that's something that I had to forgive myself for and move forward, because in not allowing myself to do that, I would not be able to be a better person or be a better mother to my sons and be the best person I needed to be in the moment.
I just want to note, I'm hearing you both talk about very personal parts of your story, right? And what you learned about yourself and how you've coped with things. And there are folks who go their whole lives, right, without making those realizations and making those connections. What has surprised you on this journey?
Really, I usually don't open up to people or speak more. It would surprise a lot of people, and like even in my family about my journey, things that I speak about and write about now, like some that I'm very, very close to in my family
Mm-hmm.
would not know what I've been through because I have this something that I say often. If a child is hungry, they tell everyone. If an adult is hungry, no one would know unless you told them.
Mm.
So whatever we're going through as adults, oftentimes we don't share it.
That's right.
We keep it to ourselves, and that's how I was. I stuffed so much and kept so much to myself.
Mm.
So right now, in this moment, as we're speaking, or when this comes out, there's a lot of people, like my siblings, my friends, coworkers, they're finding out for the very first time.
Right. And how does that feel for you? Is it frightening? Is it empowering?
It's empowering. I'm almost
Mm.
10 years past that. I'm rebuilding, and the same thing I said nearly 10 years ago, I'm saying now. I don't take what I don't need. And
Mm.
I built myself up. I had great community support. But again, when I was able to, I went right back to work and continued to build myself back up. And
Yes.
I'm not one to wallow in self pity.
I'm
But
thinking
I'm,
about Erica Badu's song "Bag Lady." Right, leave that bag behind. You don't need it.
yeah,
Hmm.
but I'm not ever too proud to say I've fallen and I need help.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about you, Vanessa? What has surprised you or others as you have gone through the CLC?
Um, Surprised me, I would say, just the support system of all of the organizations in this area surprised me.
Mm.
Um, where I come from, you don't really see that. You don't see the support of organizations who are really interested in uplifting something that you're passionate about. So I was surprised by just the overwhelming support of, if I, asked for something, it was, what do you need? If I had an idea, how can we help?
Mm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that empowers you to do things with your boots on the ground, in the community that you might not have been able to do by yourself. I don't
Right.
have the bandwidth. I don't have the reach that Capital Area Food Bank has. I was so blessed to be able to, through them, visit the White House. And it's an
Mm.
experience that I would never have been able to get with on my own. Also, so to really expand the reach of the message, that was surprising to me. And also my mom is still confused. She's like, how did you turn gardening into speaking? She still doesn't get the connection. Or people say, like, what do you do?
You're amazing.
So
that's
yeah,
right.
that is. But the thing that surprises everyone else is that I was able to turn. I have to jump on what Latisha said and say, I come from a culture, like strong West Indian culture of,
Mm.
we suffer in silence. That's
Mm.
on the chest. Like, that is what you are learning. What happens in this house stays in this house. We suffer in silence, like a badge of honor to say that we never asked for help. And so I say this all the time, like, with the shame with that, still, I mean, people know it now because the more you practice saying it, the more you get comfortable saying it, and also the more feedback you get. What really gets me going now is like DMs from women who say, I love learning from somebody who looks like me, and
Mm.
thank you for saying things that, I'm afraid to say, and things like that. So that just, if me sharing my story helps someone else, I was coming from such a place of shame that I was surprised that people were like, thank you, we've been waiting for somebody to say this. And so
So that thanks was surprising to you.
the
Yes.
more I get
Yeah.
that, and I just stay true to my core, and I'm just myself, that's the other thing,
Mm.
right? It's like being in corporate America my whole adult life, and like being groomed for corporate America. My mother retired very high in that world is like it comes with you're almost groomed not to say a lot of things. So finding my voice again, my voice, was surprising for me, and that it would be accepted. Like, if I'm raw, real, and uncut, I almost felt like people wouldn't listen. And that's just not the case in the advocacy world. I was surprised by how many people wanted to hear, don't sugarcoat it, tell us exactly how it is so we can learn from it. Especially when we're talking about, I primarily focus on issues in the Black community. You see allies and they say, no, we really want to know how we can improve. That was super surprising to me.
Yes.
Especially coming from the South. So
I feel like during this time of the pandemic, you hear so many people talking about authentic voice, right? Sharing your authentic voice and being vulnerable. And the two of you are doing that through your advocacy and your work. Tell me a little bit about some of the issues that are important to you. Latisha, what are you using your voice for? What issues are important to you?
3 that are critically important to me is food insecurity, special needs. 'Cause I have 2 children with special needs, but 15 years before even having my older son, my career has been working with children, and adults, and seniors with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So
Yes.
inclusion, anything with that community is vitally important to me.
Yes.
And housing.
Housing. Yes.
And to me, they're all are interconnected, because to me, food insecurity is my version of NIMBYism. And that's just my personal belief.
Mm-hmm.
I equate food insecurity with NIMBYism in some communities, with food deserts and people having the thought of, oh, we don't need too many grocery stores, or we don't need this and we don't need that because we have cars. We can get to this place or we can get to that place. Well, not everyone has access to vehicles, or they have access to go to get to these grocery stores or things of that nature. So if it's not accessible to everyone, then it's not accessible to anyone.
Yes.
That's the way I feel.
Great. Vanessa, what about you? What are the issues that you care about? How are you using your voice?
Primarily and unapologetically, I am fighting for, and I am always advocating for, and trying to uplift Black communities who are disproportionately affected by food insecurity by no fault of their own. Primarily the social determinants of health and how that intersects in that way. And I do that through gardening education. I teach people how to grow food to, minimize food insecurity and also put a little extra money in their pocket. It's a way that's how my story happened. But also using food as a segue or an introduction to talk about creating advocates in the community. And especially in our community, food has always been a point of gathering. And, big things happen over food.
That's right.
Whether it be religious, family, reunions. So I use food and I use gardening and food production as a way to start the conversations necessary, difficult sometimes, and candid conversations to inspire people to advocate for their households first. That if you can advocate for the food in your fridge, that you are going to care about where your food comes from, that you're going to try and take back a little bit of control of that, then I can turn you into an advocate for the block. And that's kind of been my recipe on how I advocate.
Did you say an advocate for the block? Is that what you said?
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, it's kind of the premise of if you're in such a position usually by no fault of your own. Underemployment, unemployment, housing, you're probably working, you barely see your kids, you get home, you throw anything on, or you feed your kids and you don't have enough to feed yourself. If I can fix that problem, that gives you the headspace to, then I can talk to you about, do you see that none of the businesses in this neighborhood are owned by us or people who live here? Mm-hmm. Do you see what the county council is trying to do here? I can't talk to you about that if your head is somewhere else, as it should be, because family comes first. So we got to solve the problems in the household, and I do that in a small way through gardening education, and then I can turn people into advocates and really get them to start showing up to meetings with the county council, start, legislation, reform, and all of these different things that you really can't talk to people about if they're hungry.
Yes. It sounds like through your advocacy, both of you, Vanessa and Latisha, that you all are creating armies of advocates. By sharing your story, you are encouraging others to do the same.
Absolutely. Only by the training that we received, for sure.
Hey, Adam, I'm curious. So you completed one cohort, and now you're about to soon, Latisha, complete the second cohort for the CLC. What are you thinking about in terms of the next cohort?
It's just so awesome. Each class we found kind of has their own personality, right? But one of the things that we really tried to embed into just as a fundamental tenet is, obviously listening to the voices of our clients. And that happens in so many different ways in our advocacy platform, in our, kind of programmatic operational plans. But also we ask them, what do you think could be changed? What could make this better? Right. Yes. And we tell them, and we're just open and honest about it. Right. When we first started, and Vanessa could speak to this better than anybody. When we first started, that's what we started with. We said, hey, this is an inaugural program. We are starting from scratch. And you are an inaugural class. You're setting the tone for what this looks like, moving forward. And so I think, from the first class to the second class, what we realized, one of the main takeaways we had was writing down a 3 to 5 minute story of self, for one, is not necessarily a natural process. People don't take classes on this or anything like that. But it's also an incredibly emotional and triggering process, right?
Yes.
And we embedded a lot more time in the second class for folks to kind of go through that own, their own really therapeutic journey in some ways. And we just had to hold a lot of space for what that was like in the day-to-day on Zoom calls. And so I think we'll keep that as a tenet, in the third class. But I think the real takeaway from the second and third class is kind of the practicality of the on-hands real-time work. The most powerful work happened when we were like, hey, there's this bill coming up and we think you'd be great to testify. Are you interested? And we would kind of work with the members one-on-one to tailor it to that, testimony or a meeting with the council member or a state legislator or press appearance. And I think even though the program is 10 months long, and in this second class, we've kind of structured it so that really the actions start to happen in the last third of the class. I think for the third class, really have that practicality, that hands-on stuff going all throughout while the curriculum is kind of going on.
Yes. One of my teachers used to say, learn by doing.
Yeah.
So Vanessa and Latisha, I'm curious. One of the questions I always like to ask as we come to a close in our conversation is 10 years from now, if you close your eyes and think about what's happening, what do you hope to see happening as a result of you using your unique voice? What do you see happening differently? Maybe we can start with you, Vanessa.
I would love to have a model set up where I'm focusing my efforts in a very small neighborhood on purpose, which is the community of White Oak. I live in Silver Spring, and Silver Spring is huge, but I'm focusing on this one neighborhood because I'd like to create a model that can be replicated in other places. So I am pouring it all into them. So in 10 years, I would love to see this model replicated where we're seeing right now I have been working with an after-school program so that this after-school program is taken up by other Title I schools in the county. And, more people start to care about food, and we have more farmers markets opening and more people using food production as income, and more people in my community, young people, healing their relationship with the land so that farming is no longer assimilated to slavery. And now we're creating other trades where people just care and our communities reflect the diversity within it. So definitely I see a happy little place with a model that I'd like to think that I helped create, where communities that we used to have way back in the day, where we were kind of outcast from everyone else and forced to have these communities within ourselves, are brought up in a healthier way. We don't make it and leave the community. We stay and we fight for, and we have success within our communities. And we're all well fed. We're all well fed and healthy and invested. I think that's what we're seeing now. So I'd love to see that happen as a model that can be replaced over and over again throughout the county and the DMV generally.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful. I love the dream. Latisha, what about you? If you close your eyes and think about what's happening differently 10 years from now because of your voice.
Hoping that we can have someone that can pick up the torch and carry on, and we're not having these same conversations right here in this time and space, and we're not having food deserts, that we're not having to travel and get in cars, and we can walk within our communities and go to grocery stores and fresh markets and what have you, farmers markets and things of that nature, and shop for healthier options. Or again, can grow fruits and vegetables and not rely so heavily on resources being trucked in and out of our communities, or depend on, while the food banks and other community-based organizations are great and they're a wonderful resource, not be so reliant upon them to feed so many.
Yes. I am beyond confident that as you both use your voices, that these dreams will become reality. I know that you have the power to spark, to be catalysts. So thank you so much. Latisha, Vanessa, thank you for sharing your voice with us today on the podcast. Adam, thank you so much. And thank you to the Capital Area Food Bank for deciding in the middle of a pandemic that this program was the program that needed to happen.
Of course.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. This has been awesome. And thank you, Adam, as well. I don't think I've ever got the chance to say thank you, but thank you.
Well, thank you, Vanessa and Latisha. You guys are awesome.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Elevating Voices, Ending Hunger. To learn more about the Client Leadership Council and the Capital Area Food Bank, visit www.capitalareafoodbank.org/CLC. To learn about the work that Feeding America is doing to address equity and food insecurity, visit feedingamerica.org/ACT. Thank you to our podcast producer, Rivet 360. And don't forget, share the show with others and be sure to subscribe so that you can get new episodes as soon as they are available. I'm Amy McReynolds, and I look forward to continuing our equity journey together in our next episode.